Hello everybody, welcome to Digital Hammurabi. In case this is your first time with us, my name is Megan Lewis. I run this channel with my husband, Dr. Joshua Bowen. Hello, it's nice to see you all. One of the things that we do here is run a summer scholarship grant for PhD students. And one of the requirements of that grant is that after they have their summer of research, they come back and tell us exactly how things went, so that everyone who donated gets a chance to really see the impact their money has had. So today we have Jenna Stover-Kemp, who is going to talk to us about her summer and the research she's been carrying out. So Jenna, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Just before we get started, everyone, if you have questions for Jenna, please put them in the side chat, tag me at Digital Hammurabi, and we will get to them if we have time. So, Jenna, can you just briefly review who you are for people who either didn't join us last time or have just completely forgotten, and what your research focuses on?
Sure. Thanks for having me again. So my name is Jenna Stover-Kemp. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California in Berkeley. And my research is on Hebrew Bible. And what my dissertation is doing is I'm looking at three different texts within the Hebrew Bible, and thinking about questions of textuality, intertextuality, and cultural memory. So I'm looking at how texts form over time, how reading those texts is an act of cultural memory, and how as later texts are reading and interpreting earlier texts or adding on to them, or incorporating them into a different collection, how those acts are acts of cultural memory, and how when those texts are read by those later folks, how things in the earlier texts are forgotten and can't sort of be incorporated into their new context. So that's kind of broadly what I'm doing. And my summer research was specifically looking at the text of Isaiah, which I'm happy to talk more about.
Go for it, please.
Great. So yeah, my summer research was basically sort of going through a reading list on Isaiah and getting into that text and what some of the compositional issues are in there. And so from there, I was able to choose a text, a specific one that I want to work on. So I don't know if I should go into some of the sort of broad questions or compositional issues on Isaiah.
That would be really interesting, please.
Great, yeah. So kind of the basic intro is that Isaiah as a text made of 66 chapters is kind of broken into three main sections. First Isaiah would be chapters 1 through 39. Second Isaiah, chapters 40 to 55. And then third Isaiah, 56 to 66. And what's going on there is first Isaiah, scholars think a lot of it, or some amount of it, goes back to Isaiah of Jerusalem in the 8th to 7th centuries. And then second Isaiah would be an exilic prophet that's sort of, for whatever reason, appending his material onto first Isaiah. And then third Isaiah would be even later. So you can see sort of the growth of prophetic thought and how the prophetic literature sort of shifts from a politically located sort of commentary and critique of the social structures into more of a proto-apocalyptic, universal, cosmic sort of collection. And so what I did was I chose a text in first Isaiah, which is Isaiah 2. I think many people will be familiar with this text actually, because it starts with the vision of Jerusalem where the prophet calls the nations to come to Jerusalem and to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Yeah, if you're not familiar with that, there's actually a statue outside in the plaza of the UN that with the title, I think, beating swords into plowshares or something. So it's an image that is very available in our culture. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the chapter is a little more obscure. But the chapter that I'm working on sort of exemplifies what's going on in first Isaiah, which is that first Isaiah has material that seems old, but it also has accumulated tons and tons and tons of insertions and glosses and scribal redactions where the whole text itself is sort of a palimpsest. And it's fun to dig through it and kind of see like what's going on here, what's old, what are the glossers trying to do with the text, how does it change the meaning of the text, how does it make sort of old and texts that are in a more particular historical context, how does it make them do new work in a new context? So that's kind of what I am looking at in a broad sense.
That's awesome.
So over the summer, I was able to sort of like dig into that text a little more, and I was able to write part of my chapter on the redaction critical aspect and really make an argument for like where I see the layering happening. And for those of you who are familiar with biblical scholarship, oftentimes people will make statements about where the layers in the text are, but they don't often make arguments as to why. So I'm finding myself having to sort of start from the beginning and say, here's my approach to redaction criticism, and here's why I'm making different layers and how I'm using literary categories to sort of do that. Then the other thing I was able to write was a text critical analysis of the text, which for viewers who don't use these categories, text criticism really looks at the different manuscripts of any given chapter and sort of sorts through like, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, has this reading, and the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew manuscript, has this one, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls say maybe a different thing. And you're sort of trying to sort through and figure out which readings are secondary, which readings might be attempts by scribes to fix obscurities or ambiguities, and trying to get back to the earliest inferable version of the actual text. So those were the two things that I was really able to dig into and get done over the summer.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you've got to be very productive.
I got to be very productive. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So now I'm trying to submit this whole thing to my sort of more theoretical view and see what happens with it.
Amazing. I'm sorry, I'm just taking a quick look at the questions.
Sure.
We've already gone through most of the questions I sent you, so this is going to be a really short interview.
Me talking.
No, it's great. It's really nice to have someone, and I know from my own research that I'm really bad at explaining to other people what I'm working on. I'm like, well, it's this and this and this. And then I realize I'm talking to someone who is not also an historiology student, who has absolutely no idea of like half the things. So then I have to backtrack and re-explain and define my terms. So that was, I think, very understandable.
Oh, great.
So thank you for that. And I have to say, from a personal standpoint, I'm writing... I've written a couple of video scripts on intertextuality, just very big, because I it's fascinating, but just very basically looking at like shared themes between the Bible and Mesopotamian mythology. It's not like groundbreaking stuff, but it's nice and introductory. And intertextuality is awesome and interesting and absolutely fascinating, and how people take texts and reuse them and rework them for their own particular purposes is really nice.
Yeah. Well, and I think that project is really nice too, because we often get the connections between Mesopotamian texts and Hebrew Bible from Hebrew Bible scholars, and not from Assyriologists. So it's nice to get that project. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm having fun with it, because one of the things that I get a little frustrated with in the YouTube community is that you have a lot of non-specialists noting these similarities, which is fantastic, but then the conclusion that is come to is that it's a form of plagiarism. Which which makes sense, right, in today's understanding of texts and the creative act, but it's a bit anachronistic to use that term for ancient literature and that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's totally anachronistic, especially in thinking about Jewish texts and I mean, ancient Israelite texts sort of as the precursor to that, where the goal is to use as much old stuff as you can and to sort of re-signify it and reinterpret it. But the idea that one should come up with something brand new is totally foreign to Jewish textuality and intertextuality.
Yeah, it's not importance. Like, if you're going, and in Mesopotamia, if you're going to create something new, that is usually ascribed entirely to a god. Like, it's not a personal act of creation.
So you still have to
I'm divinely inspired.
You have to ground it into the past tradition.
Exactly. And there's one. Are you familiar with the Enuma Elish myth?
Yeah.
So, and you probably know this, but for people in the audience who don't, Enuma Elish is a creation myth mostly known from Babylon, but it's also taken and appropriated wholesale by the Assyrian Empire, who change a couple of key bits here and there, but basically use it to say, your God didn't create the world, our God did. And it's fascinating because they take it and it's reused for their purposes. And it doesn't seem to matter to them that a lot of the material doesn't work for their particular deity. Yeah. It's not important. It's just...
Yeah. That's an interesting fact to me, like, because you see this going on in the Bible too, and in this Isaiah text, that like when the scribe glosses, so I'm seeing three layers, and the first layer is this really old sort of like divine warrior trope where like Yahweh goes out and smashes all the things that are high and makes them low so that he remains high, and then the second layer makes it all like gives it this sort of historical background. And saying, oh, Yahweh has rejected the house of Jacob because they were filled with foreigners and idolatry. And whereas the original text says, humans go into the ground, hide yourself from God, the glossator makes it about, well, that the idols are actually going to go into the ground and be desecrated by bats and shrews, which is sort of like this weird literalization of this warrior imagery, this like divine warrior imagery, and it makes it so that it doesn't quite have the same, like, I'm not exactly sure, metaphorical power or something like that.
It sounds like it doesn't like hang together as well as the original. Yeah.
And even like the crescendo of the original poem, or what I want to say is the old poem, says it says the humans are sort of humiliated and they're laid low, and Yahweh remains high. Mm-hmm. But after that historical, like, Jacob's making idols situation, then it says, and the human was made low and they were humiliated. And then it goes into this call for the human to go into the earth and to get low. So it sort of creates a tension where like the human is kind of like humiliating himself by creating the idols, or I guess the Israelites are, but it creates a tension with the original meaning of that phrase, which was sort of like what was going to happen after Yahweh fought everything that was high. So like the human already made themselves low, so why is Yahweh fighting to make the human low? And so it just like it creates this tension, but it doesn't. They don't seem bothered by that.
There's no like attempt to resolve that in a later copy, or
no. It's just like the secondary scribe seems more interested in like filling in some ambiguities, like who is the day of Yahweh against? What did they do to deserve it? What's going to happen to those things that they've created to deserve this? So it seems to be like historicizing this. This kind of like multiply applicable divine warrior trope.
That's interesting. Yeah, it does. That's really interesting.
And then the question is like, once that swords into plowshares things gets tossed in there, which is really sort of like a deconstruction of war, right? And saying people aren't going to study war anymore, and they're going to come to Jerusalem. And it's not Yahweh's wrath that's going to go out from his temple, but it's actually his teaching that goes out. But it's using the same motifs and like different themes within that same motif to sort of create an even a different tension with it in saying like, it's not about, we're going to sort of overturn war and it's going to be about Torah and teaching. And so like, how do all of those tensions hang together is part of my question.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So there's one more question that I sent you, and then we've got one in the side chat. Again, guys, if you have questions for Jenna, please put them in the side chat and tag me at Digital Hammurabi to make sure I see them. Nick, I've seen your question. Thank you very much. So could you be able to go into some detail about any, like, maybe conclusions you've come to, whether you're diverging from like previous scholarship in what you're saying or what you're arguing?
Good question. Yeah, some things that I guess I haven't really come to any conclusions, but working on this chapter has sort of broadened how I'm thinking about the mechanism of cultural memory and intertextuality, and thinking about, in one text, like how are the tensions, how do they exist? How are they dealt with? What is worth causing them, in a sense? So like that secondary scribe, like what does he need to bring up and put in there at the cost of causing these tensions? That's a question that I still have. So I think thinking about, the idea of like authors as readers, different from in terms of like they're actually reading material. How are they understanding that material? And then authors as writers. So then what are they contributing to that material? And then separating that from the impact on the next reader. Right. So then what's made available apart from what they seem to be doing, writing and reading. So trying to really like separate those three in terms of my methodology and in terms of thinking about intertextuality and cultural memory. Thinking about the author, I'm really trying to write about authors in an active voice and not just, I think sometimes biblical scholarship tends to sort of de-person authors and writing about them in very passive voices. So something I'm struggling with is like pronouns for this author. Who am I talking about? Chances are that this person was a he, but like, what does that do when I just assume that? Thinking about, I'm just trying to like keep the author as a person, which is hard.
That must be really, really difficult.
It is. It's hard because there's like what the author does and then what the author makes available, right? And you have to like really separate those. I'm thinking about like how metaphor works in this chapter and in general. Thinking about like, when a metaphor is written, there's an amount of ambiguity built into it, and then how are later authors sort of like playing with that ambiguity, and are they making the metaphor literal, or are they sort of having to metaphorize what was once literal in order to make the text work? So yeah, it's bringing up sort of like bigger categories that are useful for this particular text, whereas like other texts I'm working on, I have a different sort of structure that I'm working with. So I guess it's really bringing to the fore that like theory and practice, they have to go hand in hand.
Yes.
And that I can't make this like map to go onto each of my texts, but that each text is going to sort of give me something different that's going on in terms of like the cultural memory and the intertextuality, and resisting the urge to kind of like force one onto the other in each of my chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess one of my conclusions is that differences abound.
Yeah, it's messy.
Messy. And it's nice to sort of see that there's no one size fits all. Like the theory has to be made out of the text, and the text has to be read in conversation with the theory, and that they sort of like interact in a more active way rather than as like a lens that you just put on top.
Excellent. Thank you. That's interesting and a lot to think about. And I do not envy you the task of untangling all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. So Nick J says, out of the blue, so we know it's going to be good. Oh, no, Nick, this is actually relevant. This is talking about Isaiah. What are your conclusions as to the purpose of chapters 1 through 5 of Isaiah?
1 through 5? I wonder why in particular 1 through 5. Hold on. Well, 1 through 5. So chapter 1 seems to be a bunch of stuff from Isaiah that seems to be old, kind of put together. And there's a primary heading in chapter 1 saying this is the vision of Isaiah. Then chapter 1 ends and chapter 2 begins, and then it says this is a vision of Isaiah. So it's sort of a secondary introduction to the collection of Isaiah. Generally, people argue that this in chapter 2, the text I'm working on, that was more an older sort of beginning of the text of Isaiah. Yeah, I'm not sure why you'd stop at 5. I'm curious as to what Nick is thinking about.
Nick, if you have something specific in mind, let us know and we'll see. Well, I say we. I'm not going to do anything because my knowledge of the Hebrew Bible is somewhat rudimentary. But we'll see if Jenna knows anything.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's all kind of like there's some Isaiah stuff, and then there's some reinterpretations of that Isaiah material. So it's all kind of woven together.
Oh, so he says, I ask because chapter 6 seems to be the actual start of Isaiah's prophecy.
Right, because chapter 6 you have the vision of the throne room where Isaiah goes into the temple and sees God, and then gets called to like make people's ears and eyes not work.
Okay, so I guess if 6 is the start of the actual prophecy, what is the stuff in front doing? Why not just start with 6?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think the question to ask is why is 6 where it is? Because you have stuff that's that seems to be old, seems to be from Isaiah in chapters 1 through 5. 2 seems like a more original beginning, and 6 is the call of Isaiah. And then after that, he does some stuff with the king that also seems like Isaiah. So I don't think it is meant to go in chronological order in the way that we would maybe think about writing a book. So I'm not sure that Isaiah would have been the original beginning of the book. I don't know. Here's the thing about First Isaiah is it is it's probably the most complicated redaction critical puzzle in the Hebrew Bible. Just because it's like there's layers upon layers, and what that it's interesting to me because for some reason Isaiah is so important that we have to keep commenting.
It has to be reworked and continually made relevant.
Yeah, and the other prophets have this to a certain degree, but Isaiah there's just a huge amount of insertions, and there's especially I like to call him the Bayom Hahu guy, meaning on that day, because there is this trend in Isaiah to just have these like, and on that day, here's the sort of proto-apocalyptic thing that's going to happen, and it's in the context of like Isaiah being like, you shouldn't trust Egypt or Assyria. And on that day,
solid advice. Let's be honest here. Don't trust them. Yeah.
So there seems to be just this like massive amount of interpretive work that's going into Isaiah, and it's baked into the text, which is the really fascinating part.
No, that's very interesting. Oh, this is so fun. So Tim Smith, next question. Does Isaiah's scholarship, authorship come from the JED or P schools or a different possible author?
Oh, great question. So the JEDP schools are really, you hear that?
I do. I don't know what that is. That's on your ends.
Is it? Oh, crap.
I'm just going to mute you for 1 sec. No, don't worry. I mean, it's, I think, no, it's a fun noise. Sorry, everyone. While we might have to, do you want to go out and come back in? Well, actually, it's stopped now. All right. Okay, you're unmuted. Good. Sorry, everyone. Brief.
I'm not sure the logic of my computer, but okay. The JEDP. Yeah. So the JEDP is sort of this model about that theorizes the historical formation of the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books. And it's sort of a very contentious topic in Hebrew Bible because that model got sort of like blown up historically in scholarship all over the rest of the Hebrew Bible. And so, no, JED and P are not theorized to be in Isaiah. They are theorized by some scholars to go into the Deuteronomistic history, which is like Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. That is a really a minority of scholarship at this point. But no, Isaiah has its own thing happening, which makes it confusing because there are certain methods for dealing with the Pentateuch that sort of make sense in sorting out the JED and P. And you can't put, like I was saying before, you can't just put that theory onto the Isaiah text because it will not work.
It doesn't work.
There's not these same 4 sort of coherent narrative strands.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question I can't answer, and it's a little bit, I think, outside what you're currently working on. So cool. We're going to give it a go, and we'll see what happens. So please discuss the Edomite origin of Yahweh as the son of El. There are only scholarly works on ancient Canaanite religion that mention it, and they can't find any popular books. So if we have any thoughts or recommendations.
I don't have any. Well, I have thoughts and recommendations, but I'm not sure I can make a popular recommendation. I think here, let me pull this up the shelf.
Sure.
Mark Smith wrote a book called The Origins of Biblical Monotheism. This might be helpful to you. It is a scholarly work. It's a bit dense, but it talks about the connection of El, Baal, and Yahweh. It's a puzzle. That's all I'll say.
No, that's a great answer.
Very much.
So we've also had a couple of people come in asking about what HAPS is. New subscribers, hello, welcome. Thank you very much for subscribing. So HAPS is our scholarship fund. It stands for Humans Against Poor Scholarship. And because both Josh and I have been PhD students, we have an understanding of how difficult it can be financially speaking. Often students don't get paid. They usually don't get paid over the summer months, which means that they have to rely on grants or getting work from external sources, which can make it very difficult to actually carry out the research that you're in school to do. So HAPS is a crowdfunded scholarship program. We give $2,000 to PhD students to help carry them over the summer months when stipends run out, so they can do their own research and do their work without having to worry about things like paying bills and buying food. And the money can really be used for anything. It can be used for just general living expenses while you're writing your dissertation. It can be used to fund specific research. So if you're going abroad and you need money for plane fares, or if you're going to do some kind of technological training, we will give you the money basically for whatever you need it for. We do have a Patreon page for it. If you feel like donating for next year, if you go to patreon.com, I think it's /HAPS fund, HAPSFUND. The link should also be in the channel description and all the video descriptions. Because it's crowdfunded, we do get the people who donate to the fund to help us choose the scholars whose research they would most like to see performed, which is why the lovely Jenna is here, because she came on, she told us about her research in March or April, and everyone voted and decided that they would like to hear more about her work and they would like their money to go to help her out. So if you want to help next year, we have Patreon. We also take PayPal. If you send it to digitalhammurabi@gmail.com, use that as the PayPal address. Please make sure you tag it for HAPS Fund. Otherwise, I will spend it on books. Just what happens? We get money, it goes on books. Right. And so we actually have no more questions. Everyone, if you have more questions for Jenna, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I am going to let her go. Because she is a very busy person and has, as we've heard, much research to carry out. Also, if you're watching and you're enjoying, please hit the like button. It helps us out. It means that YouTube shows more of our stuff to more people, which ultimately is an excellent thing, because I think everyone should know more about the ancient Near East. I'm biased, though, so, you know. So, Jenna.
Yes.
What is next?
What is next? Well, I got to finish this dissertation so I can get a job. Yep. Fingers crossed. Yeah. So, you know, I'm presenting at a conference in October and trying to get these chapters taken care of. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we'll finish in the next year.
Excellent.
2.
Good luck.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
We actually don't seem to have any more questions, so I'm going to wrap this up and let you go. Thank you again for joining us. This was very interesting, very educational.
Great.
And I think everyone had fun. So everybody, thank you again. We will see you soon. I have a video coming out next Friday. No more announcements, just thank you. And remember, until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?